he is. There's so many down there. Oh my gosh. It looked like a pretty decent one on Mega Live. There it is. Now we're talking. I'm gonna pull this so you don't get wrapped up. Gosh, that was so cool. There's so many on this break. It's one of the cool things about wintertime bass fishing is sometimes other types of fishing, especially in the dead of winter, can get real slow. Those fish see a lot of different pressure, but a lot of times bass are really underrated in the wintertime, just not sought after much. That cold wintertime water, there we go. On that little jig right in the roof of the mouth. Super fun. Not a giant one, but through the ice, can't beat that. Gosh, he's pegged pretty good on there. On that little plastic. I'm gonna try and get him unhooked here. Get him back. Because he's got a whole bunch of buddies waiting down there. Gosh, that's fun. So it is the middle of winter, and we are doing something a little bit different. We are targeting largemouth through the ice. We're hitting that time of year where a lot of other fish have been beat up on. A lot of the walleyes have been targeted, a lot of crappies, And this is something to just get away from the crowds, kind of do something that not a lot of people go and do. That's what's really fun about this game. As we found today, we're finding some really big schools of largemouth. As everyone knows, in the fall, when those fish really start to put the feed bag on, they tend to really school up, where you can find some big numbers, and they tend to stick to those schools all the way throughout the winter. Again, they're not as ferocious, you might say, as the fall time when they're just super fired up and you can catch them one after another. Sure, you can do that like this. It's a little bit of a slower game. As you can see, I'm really having to work for them, just barely moving them, and they'll get fired up and kind of follow a bait, and once you catch one, you can see the school kind of get fired up, but altogether, it's just a slower game, but it's still a blast. Again, these fish are relatively unpressured. There's not a lot of people doing this sort of deal, at least targeting largemouth specifically, and you can get on some pretty crazy bites. So I'm just going to run you guys through kind of a couple of the setups that I always go for, that I always have with me when I'm targeting largemouth on the ice, a little bit about where they live, what they tend to do, and just kind of all around how to target these fish when on the ice. You can see my jig. Look at that one coming up at it. I'll try and turn it here just so you can get a little better view. Oh, he's coming up. He's coming up. That is sweet. And there you can see on Mega Live, just like I'm talking about, you can see all those fish. All of a sudden, they see their buddy get caught, see him start fighting around. Now all of a sudden, they're getting curious. They're all coming over. Pull the deucer here again. And like you can see, there's just a bunch of them. It's so fun. Again, when it's cold, you get stuck in the house. The crappies are getting, they're getting fed up with people. The walleyes, it's getting old. It's just something different. Again, not a lot of people do this either, and you can find some pretty crazy schools like that where it's one after another. Super fun bite. I don't think it's another solid one. They get that. They're just thick. They're all lethargic from that cold water. Like you could see there too. That's also where that finesse gear comes into play. Just boop, that hook pops right out. But he was pinned. He wasn't going nowhere. With that super soft rod with that light tip. That little hook. We'll get him back here. So when it comes to finding largemouth through the ice, big thing to keep in mind, what I mentioned earlier, is how these fish like to roam when they get in their schools. Being mobile, that's a big thing to this. Sure, you can set up in an area if you have fish that are on a very specific spot. If it's a little rock pile, a little patch of weeds, then you can kind of hole up in an area. But most of the time, these fish love to move. They just want to keep moving, keep finding food. And sometimes it might mean that you have to check a bunch of different areas, move places. Again, staying mobile to find those fish. But once you do, you'll kind of find that spot or that area where they really like to hang out. One of the areas that I tend to look for is around the edges of basins. During the winter time, a lot of panfish and bait fish will head to that deeper water and they really school up. And that's where those bass are going to hang out to. They're going to relate to a lot of those bait fish. As we're seeing here, these fish are literally just doing laps. We can see them on the sonar following this break line. It's one of those key sweet spots, is those hard edges, those break lines to the basin. As you can see right behind me here, not too far from me, is the bank. We're on a pretty steep drop. I'm in 20 feet of water here, and there's deep water right in front of me here. It's a 50-foot basin, so lots of deep water around. But again, these fish are relating to that hard edge where they can travel around this basin, pick off those bait fish that are getting away from the middle and tend to stray off to the edge. Again, kind of corral those bait fish. Another key area that I also really like to look for is good weed points, good weed flats, the weeds that tend to stay alive or at least hold green throughout the winter from the fall. That good grass that you find in the fall that you might be catching them out of, you know, in September, October. A lot of times those fish will stay in that area, stay schooled up. So that good grass is something to really look for. And again, utilizing your technology or an underwater camera to see that grass, even your flasher to see that good tall grass. Those areas, those grass points, those inside turns, or a nice grass flat in a bay. Just areas that can concentrate those fish, hold those fish, keep the school together. Those are just some of the areas that I tend to look for when targeting a largemouth on the ice. Look at that. So there you can see those are all bass. There's my jig right there bouncing up and down. I got 3 or 4 of them staring at me here. Super cool with that down imaging. I can see a lot further than a traditional ice flasher. Normally when you get your skinny cone angle, can't see quite as far obvious as you can with this down. I can see I'm looking out 20 feet to both sides here, front and behind me. And again, it's super nice to be able to see. I can predict where those fish are moving, and then I can get ready when I see them start to come. Here's one coming up at me, coming up at me. Got him. Another one. Look at that. And that's like what I was talking about. These guys, sometimes they want to run and you have to chase after them, but these guys are kind of hanging out. This is second or third fish out of this school, and they're just kind of hanging out on bottom, which is super fun. I can just sit here and pick them off, go through my rotation of different baits. Like I said, the couple of rods that I got with me, that finesse presentation, just one of those things that just gets bit time and time again. Gosh, just another solid bass. Can't beat that. Right in the nose. Whoop. Thank you, mister. That waxy hanging off there, I'll take that back. Sweet. Get him back. So when it comes to catching these bass, there's a few different baits, like I've been saying. First one being just a simple tungsten and waxy or Euro. Again, just such a simple setup. Obviously, it's a bluegill catching machine, crappie catching machine, and the bass just love it too. It's just one of those little morsels that they just have to come grab when they see, you know, a couple of waxies just floating there. These fish are just not super fired up. As you can see, they just barely grabbed that thing right there when I just missed that one. So having just that little presentation of that little worm, that little Euro larvae or waxy, just a killer for when these fish just get really sluggish like they can when it gets cold. And those bass are just real sluggish, lethargic. They just have to come up and grab that little thing. Another one that I always love to have is plastics, as you can see beside me here. Oh, there we go. Another one, but the plastics, again, it's also just a cool look. Obviously, bass love plastics. It's a huge player in the summertime. All times of bass fishing, you know. There's always going to be a plastic of some kind on your deck. Same thing goes in the wintertime for me. I love to use different plastics. Generally rotating through bug style plastics or minnow style plastics. Something super natural. You don't really, it's not an overcomplicated thing. Sticking with natural colors, green pumpkins, whites, that bait imitating, bug imitating colors. Those are always what I tend to go for. And on the other hand of the presentations, bass aren't always like this where they're sluggish. Sometimes, again, when you get them schooled up like this, they'll get crazy fired up, and you can catch them on big stuff, big rattle baits, big minnows, big sucker minnows on the dead stick, that kind of thing. It just depends on your conditions, really. But there always seems to be something that bass are biting on once you find them. Again, that winter time, even though they're slow and sluggish, those bass, they're always down to eat. And as you can see here, it's worth your time finding them because they are a blast to catch. Even those, not the giant ones, you know, the 2-pounders, those things are a blast. And occasionally you find a nice one, and that is a decent one there. Gosh, that's fun. Chasing around bass with the electronics, again, using those simple systems, that little tungsten with the waxy, those small finessey plastics, chasing bass through the ice. You got that summertime blues and you're missing your green pals. It's a good way to remedy it.